Hey, what's up guys? Today, I'll show you a thriller mystery film, The Ninth Gate. Spoiler ahead, watch out and take care. One night, an old man is writing a letter on his desk. He looks up at something as he finishes his letter. We then see a noose at the center of the room, and the old man heads over to it. He puts his head through the noose and tightens it around his neck. He then kicks away the chair and chokes as he hangs himself. The camera then shifts to his letter in a bookshelf, showing that one of the books is missing. The following day in an apartment, we see an old man looking at the city skylines. Behind him is an appraiser named Corso with his son and daughter-in-law. The couple talks to the appraiser about selling the book collection the old man keeps. They insist on selling it ever since their father-in-law became a stroke victim. Corso then proceeds on appraising the book collection and tells them that the collection is very valuable at the worth of $600,000. The couple is surprised at the price tag. Corso also tells them to keep two special books that are extremely valuable above the rest of the books. One is called Persiles and the other is Hypermoratia di Polifilo. These two are more valuable than the $600,000 book collection. The couple thinks of selling those, but Corso tells them to hold on to it as an investment for auction. Corso then finishes up his work and tells them to wait as he finds a buyer. Before Corso leaves, he buys all 4 volumes of Don Quixote from the couple at a cheap price. The couple agrees, but the old man hears this transaction and is angry about it. In the hallway of the apartment, Corso encounters his fellow appraiser. Corso then tells the fellow appraiser about the book collection and says he can take what's left of it. He is angry that Corso snagged the most valuable books for cheap as he fooled the couple. As they part ways, Corso heads over to a bookstore. He talks to someone named Bernie. Bernie tells Corso that he got a call from the fellow appraiser. He tells him that the fellow appraiser calls Corso a con man and that Corso stole this deal with the couple. However, Corso ignores the fellow's remark, stating that it's just business. He also says that Corso screwed him over with an exaggerated appraisal of the book collection. Their topic about the fellow appraiser is cut short when Corso shows Bernie the Don Quixote books. Corso then brokers a deal with Bernie to find a buyer for the books. After their deal, Corso heads over to a building where he listens to a lecture. He notices that a woman is looking at him but breaks eye contact as he sees her. The professor then proceeds with his lecture about witches and devils pacts while Corso dozes off. After the class ends, the professor approaches Corso and they talk business. They both arrive at the private book collection of the professor, which has many topics related to the devil. Corso inspects the many books in the collection while the professor praises the collection. They then get to the main topic of their business. The professor states that he almost completed his book collection but lacks the ultimate masterpiece. He is looking for a book made by Satan himself, which could also summon Satan himself. The book is hidden in a riddle within 3 copies of a book called The Ninth Gate. However, the professor believes only one of the 3 is authentic. The professor already has one of the copies from the old man named Mr. Telfer, who committed suicide previously. He then orders Corso to look for the other 2 books, which are owned by the Kessler and Fargus families. He can find it in Portugal and France and Europe, and is ordered to compare all 3 of the books. Corso accepts the job when the professor promises him a huge amount of cash. Corso then starts his investigation on the book. He heads to the Telfer residences and meets Mr. Telfer's wife. He tries to authenticate the book and asks Mrs. Telfer about her husband's behaviors during satanic rituals before his suicide. Mrs. Telfer says that her husband is obsessed with it, but she couldn't believe it would lead him to commit suicide. Corso is not satisfied with the answers he gets as he leaves the Telfer residences. Before leaving, he spots a strange man observing him on his way out. He then heads to the library to analyze the book further to find any clues. As he checks for more reference books, he spots the woman he saw before in the professor's lecture. He keeps seeing her in different places in the library and he thinks he's hallucinating. The following evening, he heads home, but sees that someone has broken into his house. He assumes that the book might be the cause of the break-in and then decides to go to Bernie. He asks Bernie to hide and stash the book while he prepares his things for his Europe trip. During their conversation, there are people near Bernie's store who have been following Corso. Meanwhile, as Corso packs his things, he is visited by Mrs. Telfer. Corso is wary of her sudden visit and asks if she has any hidden weapons. She reveals that there is no hidden weapon aside from lingerie. She bribes Corso with money to return the book to her, but Corso refuses. She then bribes him with her hormones, and they have passionate wrestling. As Corso caresses her body and lifts her skirt, her smelly thighs reveal an ominous tattoo. After their smelly wrestling match ends, Mrs. Telfer looks for the book inside Corso's bag. However, it was already given to Bernie, and she asks Corso where the book is. He acts ignorant and angers Mrs. Telfer, and she warns him not to screw with her. Mrs. Telfer then proceeds to beat up Corso as he tries to push her back. She then overpowers him and knocks him out. The next day, Corso wakes up with a headache and tries to check on Bernie. He calls Bernie on the phone to ask about the book, but Bernie doesn't answer. He then decides to head over to Bernie's bookstore. However, when he arrives, he sees Bernie is dead. Fortunately, the book is still there in the stash and wasn't found by the assailants. Corso decides to quit the job since the job became very dangerous. So he rushes to a telephone booth to contact the professor. The professor insists on him proceeding with the job, and he promises him a higher pay. Before Corso could say anything else, the professor hung up. This forces Corso to continue his job as he has no choice. Soon after, Corso starts his travels to Europe while analyzing the illustrations of the book. He arrives in Toledo, Spain, and looks for a bookstore that used to own the Ninth Gate book in his possession. He meets the owners of the bookstore, who are twins, and he asks about the book's history. The twins reveal that the Telfer copy of the book is authentic by showing the engravings LCF in the book's images. They also reveal that Mrs. Telfer was the one who obsessed over the book, and Mr. Telfer only paid for it for his wife. The twins show him the meanings in some of the images, and they also add that the author of the book allied with Satan. The twin also tells him about the warning that the book has about fanatics or cultists. He then leaves to find the other two books to compare with his copy. As he is returning from where he came from, the scaffolding starts collapsing, and he barely escapes being crushed. Later that evening, Corso arrives and rides on his train to Portugal. He continues analyzing the book and sees more engravings stating LCF for Lucifer. He takes a break and encounters the woman from the lectures again. They have a short introduction where he calls her Green Eyes. Their train then arrives at their destination, and Corso parts ways with Green Eyes. He then heads over to the Fargas mansion to meet a book collector for the Fargas copy of the book. He greets the last of the Fargas bloodline and has a drink together. He then shows his book, and Fargas starts comparing the two books. Corso then asks a favor to analyze and compare the books. Fargas warns him of the dangers of these books, but he continues analyzing them. As he is analyzing it, he starts seeing the differences between the two books. He then decides to return to the hotel and make a call to the professor on his findings. However, as he exits the mansion, he is greeted by a car that almost runs him over. The driver then approaches him, but is stopped when a motorcycle rider arrives. This makes the car driver leave. Back at the hotel, he drinks to calm himself. He then notices Green Eyes and realizes she was the motorcycle rider. Their talks are cut short when the professor calls Corso on the phone. They then continue their phone call in Corso's room, and he reports his findings to the professor. The professor is fascinated by this and demands that Corso get Fargas' copy of the book back. Corso accepts and sleeps to head for Fargas' mansion tomorrow. During that night, his sleep is interrupted by Green Eyes. She tells him that they need to rush to Fargas' place. Corso senses the urgency and follows her as they ride to the Fargas mansion. Unfortunately, he's already killed, and the book is half burnt. He retrieves the burnt book and then asks Green Eyes about her identity. However, Green Eyes changes the topic and urges him to rush to the Kessler family and take the third copy of the book. They both travel on a plane to France and arrive at the airport. However, Green Eyes separates from him, watching him the shadows. Corso then decides to continue to the Kesslers. He then sets an appointment with the Kesslers. He meets with the Kesslers' Baroness and greets her. She shows him to the Kessler book collection. They talk about her seeing Satan one day as she writes her autobiography about that. Corso finds this odd, but continues to indulge her. He then asks for her to show him the Ninth Gate copy kept by the Kessler. She talks about how the book created a satanic cult after the author's death. That cult is fanatically obsessed with the Ninth Gate and the secret the book holds. After Corso reveals that the books are no longer with Fargas and Telfer, she becomes hostile. She realizes that the professor is trying to get all the books to find the secrets of summoning Satan. She warns Corso to run away for his own sake. However, Corso has no choice but to continue. Having failed to examine the third copy, Corso thinks of a plan to get the last book. However, he is being followed by the car driver from before. Later that evening, he gets chased by the car driver and both fight for his bag. Suddenly, Green Eyes flies in and helps him fight off the car driver. She accidentally gets hit by Corso, shocking him and giving the car driver time to escape. After the fight, Corso wants answers. He decides to go back to his room to look for Mrs. Telfer since she's related to the attack. Green Eyes and he then go to his room to recover from the fight. They have an intimate stare down and her eyes begin to glow. He paints his face with her blood as he gets mesmerized by her eyes. Corso then snaps out of it. Seeing that she is not normal, he asks her what is happening. However, she avoids the question and his interrogation is interrupted by his boss, the professor. Corso then privately talks with the professor about his encounter with Kessler. The professor then insists that he should meet her one more time, but with evidence that would pique Kessler's interest. Before Corso meets with her, he stashes the book behind the hotel fridge. Corso then meets Kessler again and shows her the variations of the 3 copies of Ninth Gate. Corso reveals that he thinks all books are genuine, and if the powers of all 3 books are combined, they might summon Satan himself. He also thinks that the engravings have to be collected for the ritual to work. This intrigues Kessler and allows him to investigate further. While he is investigating, he is knocked out by someone. Later, he wakes up only to see that Kessler is strangled to death and her book collection is burned with her. Corso manages to escape the scene and return to his room. However, when he sees someone has been here, he checks the book behind the fridge, but it's not there anymore. He asks a reception who might have been to his room. The receptionist answers that it was his beloved. He starts to doubt Green Eyes, but the receptionist tells him that it was a different woman. He then realizes that it was Mrs. Telfer, and he informs the professor of the situation. Afterward, Mrs. Telfer is pursued by Green Eyes and Corso to a manor where a satanic cult is performing a ceremony using the professor's book. The professor enters the room, returns his book, and strangles Mrs. Telfer to death. Corso abandons Green Eyes, assuming she is working for the professor, and pursues the professor but fails to locate him. In Kessler's belongings, Corso discovers a clue that leads him to a remote castle, where the professor is preparing to summon the devil with the 9 LCF inscriptions. He subdues Corso and has him watch as he performs the ritual. It appears to succeed and grants the professor strength and immunity to damage, which he proves by immolating himself. The spell, however, fails, and the professor begins to scream in anguish. Corso obtains the engravings, and the professor is mercilessly shot. As Corso enters the professor's car, he is greeted by Green Eyes. She bestrides Corso, as the two make intercourse on the ground, and she is backlit by the castle, which is engulfed in flames. According to Green Eyes, the professor's ceremony failed because one of the engravings was a counterfeit. She leaves when they stop for petrol, but she leaves Corso a letter directing him to the Seneza brothers. Corso arrives at their shop to discover that they have mysteriously vanished and that the store is being cleaned out. While workers remove a massive bookcase, a dust-covered paper drifts down from the top of it. This is the original etching, which shows a woman who looks like Green Eyes riding atop a dragon-like beast in front of a burning castle. When Corso returns to the castle, the gates open to greet him and light shines within. As Corso is welcomed in the castle gates, he realizes that the book doesn't summon Satan, but instead opens a gate to hell. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.